Continuing in the series, Experiencing God's Love, Presence, and Power in the Darkest of Places, based on the sermon series based on John 1:5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But we're going to be focusing on Elijah, and his life is really a study in the supernatural. As we were praying about what to focus on next, even researching this, you read the story about Elijah and the widow and the drought, and you think, oh, I've read that before. But there's so many little details that jump out that kind of spoke to me when I was researching this. Elijah was a prophet, and as many of y'all know, during this time they had kings, but prophets would be raised up at different times. They were God's mouthpiece. They would be God's ambassadors. They gave instruction or spiritual direction, and they also gave correction and judgment. So Elijah came on the scene at a very critical time. When he came on the scene, Ahab was the king of Israel. Now, there were many bad kings of Israel. There was a whole succession of bad kings in Israel. But Ahab stood out in that line. He was a little bit worse than everybody before him. And I say a lot because Jeroboam had followed him and he was pretty wicked. But as we read 1 Kings 16:30-33, it says, Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to forget the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethabel, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than all the kings of Israel before him. So he had the illustrious title of being the worst of the worst. That's not something you want to aspire to. And now remember, he was the king of Israel. This was the center of God's true worship. He tore down the altars of the Lord and actually built a temple to Baal. And he married one of the worst of the worst. He married Jezebel. And there's only two women in the Bible named Jezebel, and they both were wicked. So Jezebel was the one, this Jezebel is the one we always remember. But her name even meant who is the prince, or Baal exalts. So even her name was part of a ritual question that was spoken in Baal ceremony. So that just kind of tells you her parents' dedication to Baal and the kind of hardcore servant of Baal that she was. And I always wonder if she had been a servant for God, can you imagine what she would have done if her heart had been turned? But she was hardcore for Baal. She was after the servants of the true God, the prophets. They were all in hiding. So it took a lot of guts for Elijah to come up during this time. And let's see what he said in 1 Kings 17:1. He said, Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. So he took a big stand. He was calling them out. And this drought is really linked to idolatry. This drought wasn't because there was something wrong with the environment or anything like that. God was pronouncing judgment, and the drought was part of that judgment. They were an agricultural society, so to say that there was going to be a drought over the land was huge. That impacted everything, every aspect of life because of this drought. And the interesting thing about Baal was, one of the many titles that Baal had, he was described to Baal, he was the Lord of dew and rain, known as the storm god, and he who rides on the clouds. So Baal they were worshiping Baal, offering sacrifices to him. He was supposed to be the one that would bring rain, but God stopped it up. He spoke through Elijah, and he stopped the rain. So it really was a testimony to God's power over Baal. Baal couldn't stop the drought. He couldn't stop what God had pronounced. So that was one thing that stands out about this whole drought during that time that Elijah pronounced. But something that stood out to me with this too is, this whole thing started because of idolatry. It wasn't, like we said, because this wasn't a natural drought. This was a drought that God brought on the land. So for us, the application for us is like, what are the idols in our lives? Because God's going to attack those idols. It could be something, anything that we put before God is an idol. Whether it's work, whether it's money, whether it's power, whether it's just pursuit of pleasure. Sometimes, you'll hear people say, well, I was going to go Sunday, but something better came along, or I wanted to, go out, and if you do that enough, that becomes what you put as your focus in place of God. So it doesn't have to be something like a real idol, but it can be something that we make an idol in our lives. And something else from this as well. Elijah pronounced this drought, and this drought that he predicted lasted 3.5 years. So it didn't just stop for a day. This went on for some time. And Elijah himself was affected by the drought, as we'll see in the next scripture. So he was in the will of God, but he also was affected by the drought. He was affected by the things that were going on in the culture around him. And sometimes things are in our lives dry up. We'll have seasons of dryness, and it's like, where's God in this? But something that stands out with the example of Elijah in his life is that God will always provide, even when everything else around us seems to dry up. God never leaves us in that dryness in that season. And let's look at 1 Kings 17, 3-6. It says, God was telling Elijah to depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is the east of Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook Cherith, that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and meat and bread in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So this was amazing. Like, this is part of, like I said, this amazing cycle of supernatural provision in Elijah's life. God sent him to Cherith, which was actually a forest area, and said that the ravens were going to feed him day and night. And ravens were one of those, like a list of animals that God says are unclean. So ravens were unclean. They didn't take care of their own. But God sent a raven, which is very unlikely. That's like a weird supernatural thing. Just showing that God can use anything, even a bird in this case, to feed him. And he was stationed by a brook, and that brook was what provided water for him. So something about this, where he told him to move to this location, we have to be really sensitive to what God is telling us to do, because sometimes our provision is linked to where God is sending us, is linked to a location. So if he hadn't been sensitive to God and really listened to God, his provision was right there. The brook and the ravens were at Cherith, so he had to move where God was telling him to go. And for us, if God tells us to move, we have to be in alignment with God's will. If he tells us to go, we go. We don't know that our provision or our next meal or whatever it is, spiritual provision, is at the place where God leads us. So that's something important here. And I like this because this kind of shows us the kind of map of where Elijah was during that time. He was from Tishbe, which is number 1, and he was told to go to the brook of Cherith. Now, he's going to be told to move again in Kings. He stayed there and then until the brook dried up. And to get to the next place that God was telling him to go, he was going to have to go through the land of Israel. Now, after he pronounced this drought, he wasn't popular. There was a death. He was very unpopular. And Ahab, and they were already after the prophets of God. So he had a death threat over his head. So that's why he was a Cherith. God had him in hiding. So he had to go from that cover in the hiding and have courage to follow God and go over to Zarephath, as we're going to read next. So just keep that in mind, because he has to cut right across through Israel to get there. In 1 Kings 17, 7-12, it says, sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. So after a while, when the drought got really bad, even the brook dried up, and God's telling him, getting ready for him to move. It says, then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So this is really interesting. Not only did he have to go through the nation of Israel to get to Zarephath, but Zarephath was really not where you would think God would send his prophet. Zarephath, like we live in the south in the Bible Belt, this is the Baal Belt. This is the seat of Baal worship where God is sending him into. This is a land of Gentiles. They're not Jews. They're Baal worshipers. And this seems like an unlikely place for God to send him at this point. And also, another fact about Zarephath is that Jezebel was born there. And her father is king of Sidon, the Sidonians of Tyre, and he was the king over this place. So this was not where you think God would send him to go. It seemed like, are you sure, God? Because sometimes God will tell us something that don't seem so odd, like, I don't know. Like God always challenges our comfort zone. He will send us into places that really take a lot of faith to go into that we don't want to go. And this is the case with Elijah. He says, go at once to Zarephath, to the region of Sidon, and stay there. I've directed a widow there to supply you with food. And we're going to talk a little bit about widows in this society, but that's also something odd, because why would you send him to a widow? This is not the usual, so we'll talk more about that. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? And as she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me out, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." So he's sending her to a widow who has very little. If she was gathering sticks, so she didn't have any servants, obviously. She was doing this manual labor herself. And some facts about widows in this society: women in general had no status apart from the men in their lives. So if their father and their husband, that was their covering. If they didn't have a husband or a father to protect them, they were really on their own. Or any adult male, they were on their own. And a widow without an adult son or father to return to was completely powerless in the society. She didn't have a voice. She didn't have anyone to speak for her or represent her. She had a son, but he was just a child. So she really was on her own. She just had a little bit, and she was trying to stretch it for her and her son. And then widows weren't likely to starve. Even in that country, they were allowed to beg, but she would definitely be destitute. When she said she had a little, she wasn't lying. That was all she had. And Elijah stayed with her for 2.5 years, which is very interesting. So that's just a little fact about that. He didn't just stay a month or a week, but he stayed 2.5 years with this widow. So we're going to see how this cycle of provision plays out. Not only was she a widow, but she was a foreigner. She was not a Jew. She was not from Israel. She had no connection with God. So to send him to Zarephath, the seat of Baal worship, to a Gentile was just amazing. Like, why would you do that? That seems like counterintuitive. Why would God do that? And even Jesus mentions this widow. In Luke 4:25-26, he says, "I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon." So you have to remember the whole start of the drought was based on adultery. So not only was Ahab and his wife serving Baal, many of the Israelites also taken up Baal worship. So he didn't send them to an Israelite because many of them were serving Baal. He wanted to show what he could do to someone outside of that culture. He passed on that blessing to this widow because of how his people had turned their back on God. So let's look at how the supernatural cycle of provision in this widow's life. At 1 Kings 17:13-16, Elijah said to her, "Do not be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first take a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not dry up until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." And she went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the flour, the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word the Lord had spoken by Elijah. So the first thing Elijah told her was, "Don't be afraid." Now she was faithful. She got him some water, but to give her last that took a leap of faith. Now this woman was not a Jew, but she obviously had heard of the living God. She had some faith. She knew he was a man of God. He told her, "Don't be afraid." And she listened to him. Miraculously, she listened to this man and went away and did what Elijah told her. Now you think this widow had nothing. She could have thought, "You know what, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna give it to my son, to my family. I don't even know this man. What connection do I have with him?" But she had enough faith in what she may have heard about the living God to do this, and she did it. And because of her faith, there was enough food every day, not just for her, not just for Elijah, but for her family, her son. So this was amazing. God really blessed this woman. And she had a choice. When Elijah presented her with this, she could have died in lack and unbelief, or she could step out in faith and have provision. So this is a challenge for us. Sometimes God will challenge us in ways that really seem like, I don't have the faith for this. I don't think that this couldn't be God. I don't have this in this area. But that's exactly the time when we need to step out even more, because you can see through this widow circumstance, even how God was challenging Elijah. He was building Elijah's faith through this, because he sent him to a place where there was nothing and the ravens fed him. Then he sent him to a widow. So he was teaching Elijah that he would provide no matter what the circumstances, that no matter what, God can provide. And then he was building the faith of this widow that She could trust in the living God. If his own people didn't believe, this widow was starting to build faith in God. So this is like an amazing, it's not just a simple thing for her to have done that. This was an amazing step of faith because the God of the Israelites was not her God. She lived in an area where everybody professed to believe in Baal, and yet she took a step of faith and believed in this and what God was telling her. But the story doesn't stop here. It's not over. As we continue in 1 Kings 17:17-24, it says, sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. So she said, Elijah, what do you have against me, O man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? So this seems like why? Why would God do this to her? After she had been faithful, after she fed the prophet, it seems like a bad joke. This seems like, how can I trust in God? Like I thought that I'd done everything he told me, and now my son has died from the standpoint of this widow. So you can look at this as a curse, but it really was a blessing. I know it doesn't seem like it on the surface of it, but God was inviting her into his story. He was inviting her to experience his power to resurrect and to show his power over life and death. As we continue to read, give me your son, Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die? Then he stretched out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, look, your son is alive. Then the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. So he invited this woman by allowing her to see the power of the God, inviting her to take a greater step of faith into who God was, and to be part of God's story, because this is actually the first resurrection mentioned in the Bible. Before Lazarus, before even the widow of Nain's son was resurrected, this was the first actual resurrection mentioned in the Bible. So this stands out. Everyone who studies the Bible, and you come to this point, you read about this Gentile woman who put faith in the living God. So this is incredible. And even Jesus mentioned her in the scripture in Luke. So she was invited into a greater part of God's story. And then as a Gentile, she experienced that resurrection. She saw that God was the giver of life, and he could do all things. Baal couldn't bring back anybody. Baal couldn't even cause the rain. But the God of the Israelites could do something this amazing. And then the bigger picture, it was awesome that her son was resurrected. And that really affected her life, because as this boy grew up, this would be the person who would take care of her. So it affected her in many different ways. But even deeper than that, was that this woman put faith in God. It says, now I know that you are a man of God. She'd already put faith in him because of the provision she's seen, but this is deeper. This is the power of life and death that God has. She said that now I know that you're a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is true. She says the Lord. She didn't say Elijah's Lord. She didn't say the Lord of the Israelites. She's claiming him as her Lord. It's taking that step from being, oh God, that God will work for us if I do certain things for him, and to inviting him really into her heart. She saw him as the Lord. It's not a separation between this a separate God, but this is personal. So by seeing God's gift of provision, by seeing her son resurrected, this totally changed this woman's walk. If the Israelites weren't changed by having that relationship with God, this Gentile woman in the seat of the Baal belt was totally changed. Her life was changed by this interaction with God. So that's amazing. It's not just the drought is amazing, the provision, but the greater thing is that how all these things that we see God moving in our lives can bring us into a deeper walk with him, and even decide to give our lives to him. We don't hear more about her story, but you can apply things just from that stand she took in the words, that this definitely affected her. So I think that's just an awesome ending to that story. It didn't just stop with the provision that she was given. So there's some lessons from Elijah's life. Like I mentioned, Elijah's life is a study in the supernatural. This is not the only supernatural thing that Elijah does. We know that Elijah goes on to defeat the prophets of Baal. So he didn't just start at that pinnacle point. We always read about how he showed up the prophets of Baal and brought down fire. All these things built up to this greater act of faith that Elijah had to do. So it's a lesson for us that God builds faith in us. He doesn't just send us off into this great work. Sometimes he does it with baby steps. He'll send us here, and this builds our faith and it builds our confidence in God. Then he'll send us to the next thing. Our life is a journey in faith with God, and so was Elijah's. And one of the big lessons that we learned early on from Elijah's life and the story that we're reading is to tear down the idols in our life. This drought never would have happened if the Israelites had just remained in faith with God. They chose to turn their back on God. Not just one time, not just two times. Every time they turned around, they were influenced by the culture that they lived in. They chose to, they looked at the culture and they lusted after the things that the Canaanites had. They had, Baal and Asherah were actually fertility gods. So there were lots of fertility rites, and maybe they thought they were missing out on a good time. Who knows what the Israelites thought. But they always were tempted to go and do what the culture was doing. And that's a lesson for us. Like, are we tempted to just turn our back on God? Because serving God is a lifestyle. It's not something you just pick up and put down. It's a dedication we make from the time we're baptized for the rest of our lives. We make a dedication to serve God and to be faithful. And the Israelites chose to turn their back on God, and God brought this drought to try to turn their eyes back to who He was. So we don't want to get to the point where God sends a drought in our lives. He attacks those idols. We want to check ourselves and say, am I putting my all for God? Am I putting something before God? So that's a lesson from this. And also, who is your source? Remembering that God is the source. Not anything we think, oh, I have to work more, I have to do this more. I know for myself, I'm always busy. I can't think of a time in my life I wasn't busy. Even when I wasn't working, I was busy. But I always have to put God first. And my mother, when we were growing up, my mom would always say, because we were around a lot of ministry stuff as kids, and my mom would say, if anything comes before God, drop it. She was like, when I would think about activities I wanted to do as a kid, my mom said, would that interfere with us going to church? And I would have to make that decision. She wouldn't make it for me. She would say, you know you've gotten baptized, you make that decision. And that really convicted me. Like, I had to make decisions as a kid, like, is that going to affect me going to church or Bible study? So my mom made me make those decisions. And I think as an adult, we still have faced with that. We now have even more choices. We can do what we want to do. We don't have someone looking over our shoulder as a parent telling us to do this and do that. But we have to live in faith, and we have to have that conviction that God comes first. So, and remembering that He's our source. Baal couldn't stop the rain. Whatever, no matter what material thing we have in our lives, we can't look at that as our source, because those things can dry up. They can come, they can go as easily as they can come. So we have to remember that God is always our source, and that provision is not dependent on location. If God tells us to move and to go to a certain place, whether it's a physical location, whether it's even changing our mental, the way we look at things, we have to trust that God will provide. That He is where He tells us to go is where He will provide for us next. Our faith can't be so caught up in one ministry or caught up in a location. If God tells us to go, we have to respond, and don't worry about how my money is coming from here, my sustenance, or my friends are here, because God will always provide what we need, no matter where He sends us. And then God can provide through unlikely sources. We saw that God provided through ravens and a widow in this part of Elijah's life, which is crazy. Ravens, if I heard God tell me, I'm not gonna lie, that a raven would feed me, I'd be like, okay, I'm clearly sleep deprived, something's wrong. But he heard this clearly, and he trusted God. He went where God told him, and it was true. God provided for him, and then He told him to go to Zarephath, and the widow, He provided through him from the widow. So it may seem like crazy that God would tell you to pick up everything, like this book that Maria let me borrow was about Wowam, and about this incredible mission that this pastor had, Pastor Cunningham. And he had this vision of all these young people going in waves into different countries. And he didn't have any money. He was broke. He was the son of two pastors, and they were broke. He didn't know how he was going to get any money to do this. I mean, it was an incredible leap of faith. And it didn't happen over 1 year. This has been a lifetime of building this incredible mission. But God provided. He provided through some unlikely sources. I mean, he got money from places he didn't think he was going to get money. And just reading that book was really encouraging and inspiring, because his ministry went through ups and downs, his money went through ups and downs, but through everything, God always provided. So no matter what the source. So that's the lesson for us. Like, just know that God will provide. If he did it for Elijah, we're his servants too. We're his children. He will provide for us the same way, even in the most from the unlikely sources. And I can testify, when I was in school, 5 years, I had a part-time job where I made very little money. And so my sister had a mortgage, I had a mortgage, we had bills. With no bills left unmet, no, we didn't go hungry. I can't tell you how we paid the bills. I can't even explain that. When I look at the money I had, and then I saved money while I was in school, I can't even tell you how we did it. It was a miracle. It was like the loaves being broken every month. Like, somehow her mortgage was paid, my mortgage was paid, all our bills was paid, and we had a little money extra to do little things we wanted. I mean, we couldn't do anything extravagant, but we didn't go hungry, and we ate what we wanted. So I count that as a blessing. So, I mean, God will truly provide. And we were talking about the other day, I'm like, I can't believe we made it. I don't even believe how we had the money to didn't give, just kept tithing, kept doing everything else we didn't do. Like, it was amazing. But God takes me through those periods, because now that he's taken us into another phase, we have to have faith that if he provided for us in that season, he can do it in this season we're in now. And it really builds your faith. He takes you, it's true that God takes you from faith to faith and the glory to glory. Like, he continues to build your faith in every season. And then if you give, you will receive. Even a little given faith can be a lot. God requires us to have faith. So the widow didn't have a lot to give. She had a little handful of oil, a little bit of flour, and some water. But that was what she gave in faith. And her giving in faith, that little bit she gave in faith, started this whole supernatural cycle of provision. Elijah was provided for, her and her family were provided for 2.5 years. So we may not have a lot to give. We may think, oh, I just have a little time, or I just have a little money, or I'm able to teach, or I'm able to do this, or, whatever we have to offer God is, if we do it in faith, God sees the heart. He knows that we give, another widow mentioned in the Bible, who gave all the coins she had. That little bit was everything that she had. God blesses that. He blesses our faith. He blesses what we give in faith. And he also sees the heart. He knows the humility and the disgenuine. And so he sees that, he blesses that. And just like that widow experienced a cycle of supernatural provision, I'm sure many of us here can testify to times in our lives where God provided supernaturally. So I love this, because we're praying to see God's signs and wonders and supernatural things in our lives and in the lives of others. And this is a testimony to what God can do. It happened for Elijah, it happened for this widow, and we can experience God moving supernaturally in our lives as well. And then the last part is the resurrection. The widow experienced seeing her son resurrected. She was able to see firsthand that God is the giver of life. And she was a Gentile. She was not from a place where people put faith in God. And yet she became part of God's story. So we can see God resurrect things in our life. There may be things that are dead in our lives that we don't think that there's any hope for. But God can resurrect, and he can turn things around. And even through, just like this widow, the resurrection of her son caused her to put greater faith in God. When God brings things back to life in our heart, our dreams, our hopes, it really does, it just solidifies that God is faithful, that God is true, that we can trust in him. It builds a deeper faith in us. So this story of Elijah, it may be something we read it many times, but I encourage you, just like I did when I read through it, when you comb through the story, there's so many little nuggets of wisdom and things that maybe we can apply to our own lives. And maybe you'll find things that I didn't find, but it may be things that cause you to have a deeper faith with God. So as we go into ministry time, I just want to encourage you, if maybe we can listen and hear if there's things that God wants to resurrect in our lives, as we talked about earlier. It's the things that we need to lay down as the idols in our lives before God. Is there something that God is calling us into that we need to have faith for, like this widow or like Elijah? So we're just going to take a minute to hear, and then if anybody wants to share, we can.